Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Hey,
He did have hair.
and I used to have hair like that. He had a big old fro.
But over the years, he's longer. That's right. As a result.
You know, I taught him too.
You go on Facebook, please.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Well, you the man. I'll be out there holiday. Look. Yeah, I'm looking at more behind the curtain. That's what it's this wall. I can tell. Yeah, he's a man, man.
Okay, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
So I need to get this.
When told me, I told myself, oh, I can just answer some more.
Okay, do this.
When it comes to state, it's out there.
Stick this right behind.
Everybody, when it's genuine and not playing, it's amazing.
Give me 1 second.
Yes, ma'am.
And Ram, you wear all these clothes out the foot
Hey, I'm saying, my mom, so she said, I might just apply I've got to see that recording. I won't get the financial.
What's the representation?
Who is that? Oh, there she.
I'm doing here in my room, Jay Johnson.
Yeah, she was the doctor, but right, my practice. Yeah, all of it. Sure was. And Miss Will. And I'm a Will one, you can really tell.
This real wood, real quick. Okay, so they had a right.
As I know, he takes these girls around school. I do this walk from a block away. I was sitting outside of my truck looking out the music hallway.
Hey, Fletcher, we're gonna kill the noise. They're broadcasting the audio.
Okay, I got you. Okay, we got a stand.
Okay, Dennis, give me a second. I'm sorry, y'all, but I'm gonna need you to go out. I apologize. I'm trying to get this straight.
Yeah. Audio from this room.
This is out behind my car.
It is? Okay, well, I
It is, but it's from this room.
Okay, Dennis, we hear the audio in the room from here.
you got to see the presentation, but we put your picture up in my convocation and shared a quote that you had. And I know that the two of you have been very, very busy over the last several months, and in particular after the whole terrible thing that happened with George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, and then the whole thing of just people being uneasy and unrest and people wanting to make change, and others not knowing where to stand. We have young people that have had been in protest movements that are pre-K babies to 16 and 17-year-olds that are ready to use their voice, and staff who want to try to help, and we're coming back to school, and it's kind of the perfect opportunity. I like the title of your presentation, which I and thank you both for your willingness to help us. And one last thing that we shared in the convocation, and I want to share again right now, this is not a one and done. This can't be. It's too important of a matter of what's inside of our lives and some of the challenges we all are needing to work through and grow from. And we're going to be counting on both of you to help us with that. So, Mr. Wood, I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you, Superintendent Poore, and thank you everyone who is in the audience for your time and for your attention. My name is Donald Wood. I'm the Executive Director at Just Communities of Arkansas, who, like Superintendent Poore said, has been a part of Little Rock School District informally and formally now for 2 or 3 decades. I'm joined by JCA's new Senior Facilitator and Lead Consultant, Amber Booth McCoy. Amber and I, to be honest with you, really struggled in preparing this professional development, activity. We saw this as something very different than anything we've done before because of our connection and passion for education for the youth of Central Arkansas. And so we see this more than just education and awareness around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the school district, and more of a hopefully a unique call to action, almost a call to instigate, to be more than just actors in the work to advance equity and inclusion, and more of accomplices in this work. Like Mike said, this is an unprecedented time in Little Rock, and obviously in our country. This is like no other time that any of us have faced, particularly in something as complex as running a school system and going back to being, educators after the past 4 months of again, unprecedented, time. We feel that because of this intersection of COVID-19, the horrendous murders of people like George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, with the protests that have gone on, and sort of an awakening like our country maybe hasn't seen in decades in terms of justice that is among us, that this isn't a matter of going back to the quote-unquote old school, but how we respond to and how we embrace our roles and responsibilities to the new school of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so over the next 50 or so minutes, we're going to talk to you about, in particular, 3 areas about what we deem as the new school of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the educational sector, focusing on the why, what, and how. And like Mike said, this is just the beginning. This is such a small piece of what will be a long-term journey of patience but persistence in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our school system. So I'm now going to turn it over to Amber to start us off with the why.
Thank you very much. First, we're asking for you to share with us one word about your feelings and starting the new year. the 2021 school year, please send them to us if you can. There you go. You're welcome to text them to us to this number. We want to hear from you. I know as a parent of LRSD, having two boys who will both be in high school this year, I don't know how I am feeling. If you have tips on how to handle two high school boys, you are welcome to also email those to us at this time. But starting in this new landscape is, there you go, eager, anxious. I have excitement as well as a little trepidation. What I know is that the thoughts and feelings of going back to school are as varied as our experiences, backgrounds, culture, terrified, anxious. And I would love to be able to give you all a hug, but we're in a global pandemic and therefore I'm unable to do that. But you're welcome to send those to us because we want you to be able to see just how varied those ideas and thoughts are. And we go back to the slide. When we talk about the why, so often the why of diversity, equity, and inclusion gets caught up in the mess and we miss out on the message. The message is that each of us are multi-dimensional beings with identities that are as varied as our backgrounds, our experiences, our thoughts, our perspectives. And when we are unable to show up as our whole self, each of us making space and room for our whole selves, we miss out and so does everyone else. When we're talking about the mess, that's when it comes into politics or when we're talking about organizations. But the why of diversity, equity, and inclusion is being able to acknowledge that right now we are in unprecedented times and there are conversations around race, equity, social justice, anarchy, you name it, on a national and international stage. And whenever we can start looking at the systems that are in play that cause oppression, whether it's ageism, sexism, racism, classism, nationalism, whenever we can look at the systems, we can stop looking at each other as circumstances and stereotypes. Whenever we're able to make space and make room, we can hear and we can begin to sift through messages with our heart and not our head. We can start seeing that maybe it looks like anger, but really it's fear. And maybe it sounds like insubordination, but really it's saying, pay attention to me. Maybe I looked unconcerned or I look inattentive, but really I'm just overwhelmed and obliterated because I was already battling poverty and now I'm battling a pandemic. Whenever we're able to move past the mess, diversity, equity, and inclusion is about the why. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is about the message. And the sooner that we can be more inclusive, we can start dismantling those systems together. And that's what equity is about. Don?
Thank you, Amber. JCA is an organization, like Amber alluded to, that focuses on the systems that are inequitable, that are not inclusive. And, you know, to focus on a system, and in order to change a system, the best way to be an effective change agent is to understand that system, to know what that system looks like, and essentially how that system works, and understanding your role in that system or responsibility to that system, or the benefits or the disadvantages you have because of that system. So it's critically important when we're talking about creating a new diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI culture, we focus on the importance of understanding what this system is. And at JCA, we use a psychology theory of change called the cycle of liberation that undergirds and influences and inspires and informs the work that we do in this presentation. I think it's important for you all as educators, as natural change makers, to understand how this process, works. And what it says is that in order to create systemic change, we have to focus on three areas: the interpersonal, the interpersonal, and the institutional. The interpersonal, obviously, is that work we do on the inside, building that capacity for change and readiness. That leads us to the ability to be more effective at the interpersonal, or the connections, the relationships that we build and maintain with each other. And then we're leading to that co-creating that work together, that coalescing and coming together to change the policies, procedures, the practices of the institutions that we're a part of. And then this cycle goes on and goes on. And then that leads to that systemic change, with that interinstitutional, with the inter-community change that really can lead to something transformational. And that's ultimately what we're all working for. It's important that when you're thinking about the what, that you do your best as educators, as change agents, to think about where you are and where you want to be as an individual, also as an organization, but think about as an individual. And I would imagine you're going to, like, if you're any normal human being, you're going to experience some level of cognitive dissonance or productive tension, we like to call it in the JCA, parlance, but really it's discomfort. And you've heard phrases like lean into the, discomfort. And, we like to say that our main job at JCA comes to the work we do is helping people get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because I hope, and I believe in my heart of hearts, that every one of you in the audience right now is feeling this level of dissonance about where you want to be as an educator, where you want your be as an institution, where you want your community in the Pulaski County Little Rock School District to be as a school district, and where you are. And so we want to do our best to make this a personal experience and to manage that tension. Another thing that's important to us, and we want to model why this is important to us, is the fact that words matter, but impact matters more. And we have to understand that our intent does not always equal the impact that it has. And so what's critically important is coming to mutual understanding with each other. And so that's something we also do in the work that JC, but it's also a lesson that we hope to communicate to you all, because explanation is really taking the time to understand others and to open ourselves in order for folks to understand us. Because I have to believe we all know how destructive it can be to only rely on definitions and descriptions and not seek to make sure that others understand us, or we seek to understand others. And in order to do that, we have to understand that, ignorance is something that leads to oppression when it's combined with power. I think the most well-intentioned people, have led some of our most oppressive institutions and communities. And so we want to make sure that we are understanding the what of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what it is. I think you all understand this, and this is going to seem maybe to a lot of folks a simple example or description of the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I guarantee you that this is going to be kind of presented in a way that will make you think about how you approach, education, equity, and inclusion. So we're talking about diversity. We're obviously talking about representation. That's unavoidable now in our world. We live in a diverse world, a diverse community. That doesn't mean that we can't celebrate diversity in a way that creates inclusion and equity, and we can't advance diversity in a way to make sure that in our leadership ranks and within our representation on committees and groups that we have diversity. But diversity is here. And so it's about how do we make the most of that diversity. Equity is about access. When we're talking about equity, we're talking about an equal opportunity to access, giving people a fair chance to reach their whole self, to reach their full abilities. We're not talking about some egalitarian necessarily in terms of society. We're talking about just creating conditions, which means a lot of times that we have to go out of our way to actually treat people differently in order to create equity, or because we're giving them equal access to opportunity. And finally, inclusion is a sense of belonging. It's a feeling that we have. Diversity and equity do not beget inclusion. You may have policies in place that textbooks wise are good for equity, and that's important. You may have a diverse group of students, leaders, but you have to be very intentional about creating a culture in a space where people not only feel that they are respected, but that they belong there. You've heard of probably different analogies like the dance or the party in terms of the difference between equity and inclusion. I was struck by this quote from a colleague of Amber and I who does D&I work in the political sphere, Wilenia Rivera. And she uses the idea of the table. So when we talk about diversity, we're talking about being invited to the table. We're talking about equity. That's the fact that we don't have to be invited to the table at all. That table is just much our right to sit as somebody else's right to sit at that table. And then inclusion is feeling once we get to that table that we've got that psychological safety to where we feel that we can learn, that we can contribute, and maybe most importantly, that we can push or we can challenge the status quo without the fear of retribution or the fear of punishment. That we're respected equally at that table. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So real quick, I want to talk about kind of 5 principles of what DEI behavior could look like in the school. First is direct confrontation. And I use that word confrontation. Remember, we talked about words matter, impact matters more, and mutual understanding matters the most. I use confrontation very intentional because in this context, confront means to challenge something boldly and directly that needs to be changed. And I have to believe that most of us, not all of us in the audience right now, believe that the culture has to change within our schools and with our school district, just like it has to change within other institutions and communities. And so if we're going to create a culture that is truly diverse, truly equitable, truly inclusive, we have to confront those issues directly and understand what those inequities are. And if we don't, we have to take the uncomfortable steps of investing the time and energy to understand those inequities and discriminatory practices, actions, policies, procedures that are operating. Next is all about redistribution. This is more specific to equity. But we have to be extremely intentional about thinking about where our students, but also where our fellow faculty and other colleagues started or where they are now in their lives and their lived experiences that are loaded with barriers, not by their own doing, but still the fact they're loaded by barriers. And what we can do, if any of us are in any sort of position of privilege and power, which all of us on this call to some extent are, some more than others like myself, we have to go out of our way to redistribute opportunities, power that we have, again, in order to create equity for the most marginalized students, faculty, and staff. Third is about prioritization. We can sing from the mountaintops all day long how we're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we, again, have to intentionally prioritize the work that we do and how we do that work, how we implement that work, how we develop, how we create everything, anything that you do that could impact a student or a student's family or a faculty member or staff member.
If I may, Don,
Yeah.
Your resources will align with your priorities. whether an institution, whether a household, it doesn't matter. Your resources, be it money, be it time, right, will align with your priorities. If diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to you, it will be a budget line item. If diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to you, it will show up in your curriculum. If diversity, equity, and inclusion to you, it will show up in your classroom. It will show up in your intentionality in your conversation. Your resources will align with your priorities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amber. Appreciate that. The next one is, I like to say, DEI or die. And although this may seem like a kind of a jest, play on words, I'm very serious about this. DEI work is a life or death matter. If you don't think so,
ask the populations it's killing.
Thank you. Just ask George Floyd's family, Breonna Taylor's family, the family of way too many names, unfortunately, for me to remember right now. So DEI is not more than just a lens, or it's more than just a strategy. It is a way of life. And I'm getting choked up right now, but Amber and I talk about this a lot because it is, so critically important, and it's seen by a lot of institutions and organizations as perhaps a subcommittee or a task force or a strategy piece to a larger strategic plan. No, it is a way of being.
It's the framework for the plan.
Yeah, it's the framework. It informs everything that you should do and do in the work, in the way you live your lives. And it may sound preachy, but at this point, I'm fine with that because that's how important this work is. And so it's important to see this as an organization, but you personally, if you are committed to this, as a complete orientation of how you approach your life, how you approach your role as an educator. And finally, a DEI culture in an education context doesn't focus on fixing kids. That does not mean that there are episodic times when youth do things where you have to react to that specific issue in the spirit of safety. But in order to address it from an equity inclusion standpoint, the focus has to be on the conditions that surround those children that are disproportionately being oppressed and being treated differently just because they identify differently or because they have different cultural backgrounds than what we see as our kind of cultural norms. But that is a mindset that not focusing on the kids individually, but focusing on the systems that influence those kids. And I'll be the first to admit, JCA has been doing anti-bullying work at the Little Rock School District for 12 or 13 years now. And up until a couple of years ago, all we did was focus on impacting the students. And as important as that was, and I do believe how many lives we've changed is important, we were not addressing the systems around those fourth and fifth graders that were creating the conditions that led to them being bullied or led to them doing the bullying. And so we're committed now to focusing on those systems, and we challenge you to commit the same. So a diverse, inclusive, equitable culture looks like this. And I should have said earlier, and I'll let you all know now, that I will provide this presentation as a resource to you all after the presentation. So all this information will be provided to you along with other resources. So I want you to take a second to self-reflect. Over the next minute, where I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I want you to take a few seconds to answer. I want you to first, to yourself, respond to this question. Take about 10 seconds. Which identity are you the proudest of? Now, what about this question? For the third question. And finally, I want you to think and sit with your responses to those questions, but also think about how perhaps some of your colleagues who you may be with now, or students that you've recently taught, or students you know that will be in your classes next year, how they would have answered those questions. And I want you to think about what it means to not bring your whole self to a space, whether it's your work or whether it's family time or with friends socially, and what that means to you, how that influences your capacity to be your best, to do your best work, how that influences your ability to build meaningful relationships with other people.
When I think about these questions or these answers, the identity of which I'm most proud. Of course, I'm proud to be a Black woman, and that same identity is one in which I experience racism and patriarchy because of the intersectionality of it. When I think about having to not, or being afraid to bring my full 360 self. 2.5 years ago, I had gotten my hair done in what's called faux locks. I didn't really want dreadlocks. I just wanted to wear dreadlocks, right? So they're called faux locks. They're fake locks. And I put them on and I loved them and I was so excited. And the night before I went to work, I had a complete anxiety attack. It came out of nowhere. I began to think, oh my God, Amber, I can't believe you're going to go to work with this Black hairstyle. I can't believe you're going to show up to work with a hairstyle that is so common in your culture. But I was afraid to go to work with a hairstyle. And there's someone going, well, that's just crazy. But then I'd have to say, there is a whole legislation act called the Crown Act that provides protection for me as a Black woman to wear my hair the way it grows out of my scalp. A law needed to be passed in California and other states so my hair can be worn the way it grows out of my scalp. So to be able to bring my full self, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just about the idea of everybody getting along. But when I'm able to bring my full self and I'm training on bias, when I'm able to bring my full self and I'm training on race and I'm training on micro inequities, I'm telling you about my life. I'm not just training you on ideas and concepts. I'm telling you what I know to be true about my lived experience, and being able to share and see the windows and mirrors in the experiences of others' lives. There may be experiences and you do not have any frame of reference. Those are windows. When you have a frame of reference, those are mirrors. We have to be mindful of the windows and mirrors that are provided to us each and every day.
I just want to jump in if I could, and I know that I so appreciate everything you're doing so far, and I want you to know that people on Facebook are paying attention and are making comments, and I assume there'll be a way later on for you to go back, but some are just saying, speak, Amber, speak, and giving you positive praise, and others are sharing. Ms. Yolanda Watson saying, we've got to change our mindset, really in terms of our own framework. And this slide in particular struck me of thinking about it in terms of identity. I thought my identity I'm most proud of is being a dad. And, it's kind of an interesting phase of my life that they're kind of a little bit more independent away from me. And I'm still thinking that's maybe the most important thing I've got. And then the challenge of being a superintendent in these times and what that does in terms of how I'm always trying to find a third alternative, or find, if like Teresa and Apport and I are always working on trying to find some sort of better way to do something. And then I end up sometimes letting go some stuff that maybe is a core value, trying to find a common good. And I don't know if you want to comment on that particular topic, but when you try to compromise and give up something, especially in these challenging topics, how does one deal with that? And I hope you don't mind me butting in every once in a while with Facebook comments.
Not at all. Go ahead, Amber.
I think that we have to be mindful of when we say compromise, what that is. What we're essentially seeking, or when we talk about inclusivity, is to be in just relationship with each other. So is what you're giving up still allowing you to be in just relationship with this idea while still providing equity for the next person? So there's this balance in trying to juxtaposition what that looks like, and being able to have multiple voices at the table is how we're making sure that you get the best idea, if you will, or the best outcome possible for the most or maximum people possible. Because until we acknowledge that society has to work at its maximum for the most vulnerable of us, and until it does that, it doesn't work for any of us. So.
Thank you, Amber. Yeah, and thank you, Mike, for sharing that. No, we appreciate and encourage you to share that. It's interesting you bring up the dimension of being a parent, because that is something when Amber and I do our training, we talk a lot about identity and intersectionality, and talk about the different dimensions of culture and identity. And often, especially when we're working with adults, they mention being a parent or being a spouse. And you think about, though, juxtapose that with my experience with working with Little Rock School District students in the past couple of years who identify as LGBTQ plus, not feeling that they can share the fact that they are in a happy, loving relationship with a partner. Can't share that with their colleagues, let alone educators, maybe some. But for the most part, there's not a culture where they feel psychologically safe to talk about the fact that they had a great time at the movies on their date with their partner, because they know that in a culture, as most of our schools have right now, unfortunately, that if they mention somebody that happens to be of the same sex or trans or is openly queer to other people, then they're not only judged, but that could completely affect how they're treated from their time out on in the school experience. So it's so important that, I believe everyone has the capacity for empathy, but it's so important that we use this intersectional lens that Amber's, been talking about constantly. As, again, it's just like the Ms. Watson, I believe, said, this is a mindset. And the mindset with an intersectional lens is that at any given time, our colleagues and our students have a multitude of identities that are intersecting with each other. And not only intersecting with each other in a way that's unpredictable, especially with youth, and because of their brain and other physiological development, but also because of external factors that are interacting. We don't know when they woke up that morning all the things that they went through before even entering those school doors that impacted their identities, and to have to suppress or drop one of those identities, especially for a long period of time, is not only psychologically and emotionally damaging, it is literally physically damaging. So, one example I like to use for folks is if we look at this resume and we think about, this is arguably the ultimate U.S. warrior, a person that has put their life on the line multiple times to defend and fight for our freedoms, our liberties that we cherish so much. This is the resume of one person. This is that one person. This is Kristen Beck. Kristen Beck is a transgender woman who is one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in the history of the United States. Kristen wrote a biography a few years ago and talked about how as early as 5 years old, she knew that she didn't identify with the masculine or the cisgender male stereotype that was constantly in her face, that she was conditioned to pursue. As much as she wanted to be in the military and fight for her country and be a Navy SEAL, she had to suppress that. And a few years ago, some of our leadership in our government decided that transgender people don't have the right to serve in our military and fight for our country. So although Kristen had retired, she and a million plus other trans people in this country got the message that they're just not worthy to put their lives on the line for all of us on this call, for our liberty, for our justice, and all the things we've been talking about. And so, as we move on to the next section, it's a rhetorical question, but, how do we ensure that everybody, from students to faculty to staff, to the families, to the community members, the contractors that support the Little Rock School District mission, how do we make sure that people feel welcome, that they're respected? Something as simple as using pronouns. Not all of us are comfortable and understand the use of pronouns, but the idea that some people don't identify with the dominant kind of cultural gender norm. And just think, if every single teacher, every single educator used their pronouns, how the hundreds of students who don't identify as straight in Little Rock School District would feel just that bit more welcome. How Kristen may have felt at 5 or 6 years old if her educators would have made sure she felt that she could be who she wanted to be.
Hey, Donald, I want to insert a voice from staff. Hunter Gillette just shared this comment that fits perfectly in, I think, right here. Says, just imagine the personal struggles that our students and staff go through while trying to juggle the rigor of being a part of an academic setting. And he went on to say there's so many debates within that one topic. Yeah. And I think that's what you're trying to cover right there. But I just wanted to insert that in real quick because I really appreciate how people are paying attention and want to honor. And there also are comments I want to uphold you all that Ms. Stroud said your passion for inclusion, equity, and diversity bleeds through and through. We appreciate this. I like this a lot. Another person said, Ms. Desmuski, the next steps are critical, though, and they're hoping that you're going to share a little bit about that, too, because they don't want this to be just a one thing done. There's work that's needed.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, and thank you all so much for those comments. And I guarantee you, Amber and I are going to go through and read every single one of those. Before we get,
I know my mom will.
Yeah. Before we get into those next steps that Amber is going to get into, Amber is going to kind of remember when I talked about the importance of understanding the what and understanding the juxtaposition or the dissonance between where we want to be as a school district and as individuals and where we are. So she's going to talk a little bit about the reality of where we are.
So I want us to be transparent and realistic. We in Little Rock did not just start fighting for equity and inclusion with the murder of George Floyd. Prior to the launching of a global pandemic, this city has known race wars. This city has a freeway that was built to divide. We, in 1957, stood on steps divided by race and ideology while Black students fought for access and equality, demanding to simply be taught. And 62 years later, in 2019, we stood on those same steps, somewhat not as racially segregated, asking for the same things. Our fight for equity, access, and opportunity did not just start in 2020. but 2020 has provided us with any clarity that was necessary, the visual acuity to see the cultural astigmatisms that we were suffering from and chose to ignore long before 2020 got here. When we are talking about affirming students and acknowledging their identities, there is a 3-word phrase that is causing uncomfort for some. It is affirming others, and it is as simple as Black Lives Matter. If you are wrestling with this sentence, if you are struggling with this sentence, August 24th may not be for you. In a district where 70% of the students are Black Lives, matter is the minimum that is being asked. Matter is when we acknowledge the existence of. When we're talking about a state where our children experience adverse childhood experiences at a higher level than the national average, we have to do more than matter. We have to acknowledge the trauma of these children. We have to acknowledge that those children grew up to also be our colleagues. We have to be transparent about the fact that if we are not honest about our trauma as a society, if we do not express not only that it's Black lives, but all lives, our cisgender, our non-cis, our queer, our Muslim lives, our Hispanic lives, our Marshallese lives, if we don't value, endorse, support, care for all lives, why are we here? Matter is the minimum. And anybody who has talked to me longer than 5 minutes knows that I love my educators. I am the daughter of a principal. I'm the niece of a principal, and education means everything to me, and educators mean everything to me. They are, to me, the social equivalent of some men have greatness thrust upon them. Those are educators. The gatekeepers of tomorrow, every single LRSD employee, not just the teachers, not just the administrators, every single LRSD employee has to determine that all of our lives have to be valued, supported, endorsed. If we are going to actually heal from the trauma, those same ACEs, those same adverse childhood experiences, they change the DNA of those who experience it. And ultimately, the life expectancy. When we say that DEI work is a matter of life and death, my trauma is changing my DNA. As a Black mother, every single George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland that I see is traumatizing to me. I no longer watch these videos. I'm unable to watch these videos. So to have to fight over a sentence where matter is the minimum, that's traumatizing. On the other side of that trauma, if we do it right, it's resilience. If we do it right, it's healing. It does come from the uncomfortable conversations. You are not, let us be clear, it is not courageous to have conversations about identity. It should be the standard. That is simply competency. It's not courageous. That is humanity, to have conversations about who someone is and allowing them to be who they are. Matter is the minimum, and let's just be clear.
Thank you, Amber. So now
I'm going to jump in again real quick, Donald, before you transition, because again, I want to just uphold you all that, these are challenging, it's a challenging delivery, but their staff that are so appreciative. Megan Prettyman says the work is hard, but it's also so very important. We can't let fear or discomfort prevent us from doing this work. and Sarah Stone shared, I'm so incredibly excited that we are actually having this discussion. And Cheryl Creek Woodruff said, wow, such timely conversation and verbiage. Addressing these issues does not take thought about before action and planning before implementation, and a conscious effort to self-reflect to achieve change and success. People are listening.
Wow. Thank you.
Every time someone is listening or I'm heard, that's one piece of layer of fear that I get to take off for my 2 Black sons. Every time I'm heard in a space like this and someone says, wow, that makes me think, I get to think maybe tomorrow we don't have to fight the same fight. So.
Yeah. Thanks again, Mike. So as we move into the final piece of today, talking about the how do we move forward? What are some next steps? I want to preface those next steps first with going back to that theory of change I mentioned earlier, that cycle of liberation. You know, liberty or liberation is about actively setting people free from slavery, from oppression. And like Amber said, we keep saying educators. We mean anybody that is employed by Little Rock School District. I mean, anybody who is not only forward-facing to students, but are doing the work to make sure that those folks that are in direct contact with the students have everything they need to be their best, to bring their whole selves to those students. And in our experience, the breakdown of DEI efforts, or the fact that so many are checkbox diversity efforts, is the fact that we don't spend enough time on that intrapersonal work. So that's at JCA what we specialize in, and what we're looking forward to partnering with Little Rock School District in is helping us build that capacity to do the work. Because in a systems change model, there's nothing more that we have agency or power over than ourselves, and it has to start and end there. And Amber talked about windows and mirrors, and she's been, I would use the word courageous and being vulnerable and sharing things with you all, because I know this is not easy, because Amber grew up in a world so much different than mine. Much, much more windows, looking through at people that didn't look like her doing things in pretty much every single field. Whereas myself, I grew up in a world of mirrors. Everywhere I looked, white, cisgender male, heterosexual, were in positions of where I wanted to be. And so I hope that you all take that understanding of the fact that much of this work has to be done internally in order for the interpersonal work and the institutional work to be effective. In the big picture setting, slavery was a horrendous institution that, although codified in a way that dismantled it, because of that intrapersonal work that was not done at our leadership level, led to convict leasing, led to Jim Crow, led to mass incarceration, the systemic war on drugs, and leads us to today in a world where the disparities are just as bad, if not worse, in race, gender, and other areas of our society.
Hey, Donald, I think it's perfect time to throw in a question from a staff person that said, am I the only one physically upset about this? It's sad how technology has progressed more than our ideology over the last 50 years. And I'm not going to say this person's name because I'm not sure she'd feel comfortable, with it, but I appreciate her comment.
Yeah, and I do too. And you definitely are not alone. There's no doubt in my mind you are not alone. And the fact is that we've hid behind masks of illusions in the form of just focusing on diversity efforts like multicultural arts fairs or having a student diversity club, which are all important. But remember what I said earlier, diversity does not beget equity and inclusion. And we put the onus, especially I think in the education system, on students to kind of lead the way. But that's different than not creating the systems around them to support them in order to truly lead the way towards equity and inclusion in our education systems. So yeah, you have damn right to be really mad, very mad. But that righteous anger is one we have to use, we have to leverage in order to, like I said earlier, instigate this cultural change.
And call it out.
And call it out. Yep.
Call systems of oppression that you see out. Don't let them slide. Do not ignore them. Don't accept them as status quo. Assimilation is racism. Assimilation is oppression. When we're talking about diversity not being the ticket, things and people are naturally diverse. But if those same people are having to fit into what the norm is and shape themselves into what the norm is supposed to look like, that is still not diversity. Equity is when we dismantle the systems that require them to make themselves small.
Yeah. So Amber, why don't you tell us how we start doing that?
So
Let me interject real quick on one more thing, Amber. I've got a comment that fits into this that Ms. Watson pushed out, Yolanda Watson, and she said, all lives matter, and it's all caps and big exclamation point. Looking through the eyes of others, I am somebody. And I have a feeling that the things that you are saying today is really having impact on multiple people and getting a lot of positive comments about the courage of this conversation. So I'll let you bring it home now, Donald and Amber.
And Amber, real quick, I just want to acknowledge Ms. Watson and others. I feel because of our experience that there's a lot of people that are being triggered right now and to some extent even being perhaps re-traumatized by bringing up and thinking about these things. And I want to acknowledge that please do everything you can after this to practice self-care, do what you need to do to decompress, to take your head out of this space for a while, because we understand and respect that this is and can be traumatic. Sorry. Go ahead, Amber.
we talk about equity and what it looks like in the classroom. These are 10 commitments for the equity literate educator, and we will email these, same with the PowerPoint. And I'm going to highlight 5. If you can commit this year to 2 of the 5, then you just made a difference in 100 kids' lives and you don't even know it. All right. I will inform myself. I will find strategies for bolstering equity based on evidence of what works. For me, that is reminding myself that a fish will always fail if I'm judging it on how it climbs a tree. Okay. I will inform myself and make sure that I am using actual evidence and what works for this child. What works, again, we're not shooting for equality. Equality is already a law, and we can see how that's working out for everyone. Okay. Equality is already the standard. We have laws written on equality. Equity is where we give what is needed to whom it is needed. I will work to recognize the conditions I am not conditioned to recognize. That is looking for those windows and mirrors, acknowledging when your experience is not like someone else's. It's being able to see that you can't share what you don't know, and being able to know that half of your curriculum and the learning that takes place walks through the door when the children do. They have the other half of that curriculum. Being able to bring their full 360 selves enriches every single life in that classroom. Being able to share. One of the most powerful moments that I had in SEED. SEED is a national program called Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. The teacher said that she allows each student throughout the year to teach one thing that they're good at. This does not have to be school related. But can you imagine the lessons that are taught in this class? Even if it is just how to make a sandwich, or maybe it's just how to make my favorite snack. Maybe it's how to say words in my native tongue. Each student gets to teach a lesson. They get to share their background with those around them. That is powerful. I will never reduce equity to cultural activities or celebrations. Having Cinco de Mayo Day is awesome if we're not going to talk about the history of these same things that we're celebrating. It's just those checkbox diversity that Don and I were talking about. I will work with and in service of marginalized communities. We have to be able to amplify the voices that need to be amplified, to make sure that we are centering voices that are unheard, making sure that we're not putting the focus on ourselves. We're not going in to save populations. That is the difference between engagement versus outreach, right? Outreach is where we are going in and we're going to make everything better. We are reaching out. Engagement is where we ask, what do you need? Before I even start going in and trying to change anything, what is it that you need? I will prioritize equity over peace. That's important when we're talking about making sure that voices are heard. When we're talking about equity, I am reminded of a dear friend and colleague, Katina White. Don and I have what we call healing spaces and are going to provide several for a couple of schools coming up in LRSD. And Katina attended this healing space and she was talking about the messaging she received. She went to Watson, McClellan, and another school in Southwest, and she's going to be upset that I forgot. She went to these schools and she said she remembered the messaging, if you will, that the community, her peers, and even her teachers gave her about going to this school. Katina is now one of the most gifted educators I have ever had the privilege of working. She has one of the most amazing engineering minds, and she talked about some of the hurt that, or the trauma she's experienced from hearing her colleagues provide that same messaging about students in those schools. And then Katina began to cry and said, those kids have gifts too. This school year, while we're reimagining what school looks like, while we're reimagining what classrooms look like, let's also reimagine what we think gifts are. What if somebody had told me that Dr. Dre was an engineer? Because he is. What if somebody had told me that Tupac was a poet? Because he is. Those kids have gifts too. Let's be able to determine that we're going to recognize windows, mirrors, and acknowledge that what we thought we knew, we may not know, and be culturally humble in learning new things.
Thank you, Amber, and thank you again, Superintendent Poore, and to the entire Little Rock School District family. We appreciate your time and your attention, and like I said earlier, this information will be provided to you, and this is going to be the most difficult thing we hope you've ever experienced, but we're here for you. This is our contact information, whether we're officially working with you through the Little Rock School District or you just need to contact us because you just don't know how to process what's going on or you've hit a hurdle. You know, we're here for you, and we'll do the best we can. But we also recognize that this is a learning process for us all, but we've got to do this together. So please take care, and we look forward to working with all of you.
So let me take it from there, and I want to just thank you both, and I hope that everyone is taking a snapshot of this final slide because it's a powerful slide of a way to reach out. And one of the things that you didn't mention that's a support mechanism that people could go towards right now is this healing space environment that you've all created. Could you quickly share that?
Our healing spaces are that spaces. I always get the acronym incorrect, though. But it is a place of transformation and truth and conversation that allows for where we facilitate guided conversations centered around race and even the trauma of what's being experienced right now in society. So we've facilitated, dozens and dozens of those. And what I'm confident about is that people leave there feeling a lot better than they came, being able to just express and share with those around them.
And aren't those just available? Like you have some of those that are just happen each week that people can log into? We are right now have some set up with specific schools, and we're happy to work on setting up even more. Okay. And then the other thing that the PowerPoint, I know that our professional development team will make sure that that is on our website so that people can have access with Dr. McCarroll and Ms. Worsham taking care of that. I also was struck by the 10 Commandments of Equity Literate Educators, the final slide. If you could please send that to Mr. Rutherford and Mr. Smith, and they can shoot that out to every single principal, who then can give that one sheet at least to their staffs as kind of a hold on, and maybe it'll also make people dive back into the bigger PowerPoint. So we'd love to have that. And then I just want to finish with just a couple other thoughts. The comment of matter is the minimum. Okay, just think about that. It's a powerful message. And inclusion is belonging. And if you think about inclusion is belonging in the speaking that took place during the formal convocation with Deontay, a student that's a senior, Deontay Floyd at Little Rock Southwest High, and then Jeff, that's a teacher for us up at Roberts. They both were talking about that as well, if you really listen to their message. And so this whole morning has been about the fact that sometimes we have to take a step back to listen to others and include them. And inclusion is belonging, which was a powerful phrase that you all shared. We've gotten tremendous feedback through this hour. I wish that the way that we could set this up was that you could see a chat of just applause and gratitude, but that's not the reality because of how many employees we have. On the other side, this has reached well over 3,000 people today, and has the power to reach even more by what our own individual actions become after this. Those actions can come from teachers, it can come from administrators, it can come from classified employees. It can be something very selfless in terms of what you do for somebody else. One person can make a difference, but collectively we can make big strides, and we're going to continue to work with Just Communities. So it's been, in my mind, a very good morning. I appreciate Donald and Amber. I appreciate Jeff and Deontay again, and all the efforts that have been made to make this convocation successful. And we wish everyone a good rest of this day as you move towards things at your sites and towards other professional development opportunities. And we will get those documents to you as quick as we can. And everyone go have a good lunch, if nothing else right now. So thank you again, and we'll talk later.